Despite what he presented today as the narrative of the Zionist, he knows that he does not really, he represents shift in the American psychology toward a person who can understand the world, who could be sensitive to the world, at least sensitive to the need of the Palestinians who are suffering daily. But we don't see in any of the speeches any kind of addressing to their grievances or to their suffering.
Okay, let me put the issue of the Middle East peace process to Eli Lake. I mean, how do you see U.S. relations with Israel, driven very much by the Jewish lobby, as affecting U.S. policy in the Middle East? I mean, surely it affects things like the stagnated Middle East peace process.
Darren, don't take this the wrong way, but if you're going to ask me questions where you add things in like driven very much by the Jewish lobby, then I'm going to say that I don't think you know what you're talking about. The U.S. foreign policy is determined by many different factors, like the president, the foreign service, the CIA, and while the AIPAC is certainly very influential in Congress, we never have a discussion of Saudis or the families that own most of the world's oil that have a tremendous influence on the diplomatic corps, for that matter, retired CIA.
Do we have in the United States discussion?
Hold on, wait a second. Listen, I just heard
wait a second, because we're going to go to a break, gentlemen. We're going to go to a break.
I'm happy to go to a break.
We're going to go to a break in a second. When we come back, AIPAC officials have even been accused of spying. So, are the cracks starting to appear in the friendship with the US? Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, AIPAC and the US administration haven't always been best friends, as many would believe. Back in 2004, the FBI and the US Justice Department's Counterintelligence Bureau revealed they were investigating a top Pentagon analyst. He was suspected of handing over highly classified documents to AIPAC, which in turn handed them over to the Israeli embassy in Washington. The suspect, Larry Franklin, who was later sentenced to more than 12 years in prison, worked closely with other high-ranking Pentagon officials. He was the senior analyst on Iran, which tops AIPAC's lists of targets. So, is AIPAC a lobbying group or an intelligence-gathering network on behalf of Israel? Well, we're still joined by our guests. They're all in Washington: Philip Weiss, Eli Lake and Munthir Suleiman. Eli Lake, let me come back to you first. I mean, some critics may say that AIPAC is indeed an intelligence-gathering organization for a foreign government, i.e. Israel. What's your take on that?
Well, people who say that are idiots, and they don't know what they're talking about, and usually they're trying to basically defame Israel or the pro-Israel lobby on behalf of usually a foreign government like Iran or Saudi Arabia. But that said, the case that you described, ultimately Larry Franklin and Keith Weissman and Steve Rosen, were all charged ultimately with disclosing defense information to the public. The fact that they gave it to a guy named Naor Gilon, who worked in the Israel embassy in Washington, Gilon stayed in his post, was never made persona non grata, and indeed met extensively with the White House after this entire investigation, not to mention other individuals who were mentioned in the indictment were promoted, given further clearance and access to intelligence. I've covered a lot of spy cases in my time. I'm an intelligence reporter. I can tell you that the first thing that happens in an actual espionage investigation is that the suspected agents or spies are literally sent home. In this case, this was really a prosecution of leaking to the public, and I would think that people who sort of have made a big deal out of this, on the sort of net left and the internet blogs, would be very careful about wanting to say anything about the prosecution of leakers, given the fact that most of their tall tales about neocons and pre-war intelligence come from the very kind of anonymous leaking that is being prosecuted.
Okay, well, let's put that point to Munthir Suleiman. I mean, does the Weissman-Rosen case underline the fact that AIPAC is willing to go to any means to get the information they want, even spying?
You know, Israel is a mercenary state for the United States, and at the same time, all those cases of spying cases are the tip of the iceberg. What's ironic about all of this is that the lack of criticism even or debate in the United States about such action like Israel. You could see no even criticism inside the Congress or inside any administration, or any politician will dare to criticize Israel, while they can criticize themselves. You can have open debate in Israel about the action that Israel is taking, but you cannot have the same debate in the United States. So this is the ironic thing. I don't have no illusion about the display of power of this lobby, but this lobby also has some limitation. This lobby happened to serve the interest of the military-industrial lobby or complex, the other interests in the United States that really lie behind those who are making decisions in the United States.
Okay.
But at the same time, let's not forget that in this election, in the coming election, the Hispanic vote, the black vote, and even the Islamic and Arab vote are going to be more significant than this. Traditionally, we think that the Jewish vote going to be determining factor in this election. Money is still at the core of politics of the United States, and because the perception that the Jewish, in reality, that they fund their politics and they fund their agenda, they are more successful than the others.
Let's move the conversation on and bring in back Philip Weiss. I mean, Philip Weiss, as Munta Suleiman was saying there, it's an election year. All eyes were on Barack Obama as he addressed AIPAC. I mean, how does AIPAC view Barack Obama? Do they see him as somebody who can advance their cause? I mean, this is a man who said just a few months ago that he would negotiate with many of Israel's enemies.
I think that AIPAC is trying to warm up to Barack Obama. The reception of Hillary Clinton was much warmer. There's a lot of mistrust of Barack Obama. But I think that they will embrace him, basically because they have to, because AIPAC has great respect for power. And I guess that is the one point that I would emphasize here, is that while I agree with Eli about the question of the intelligence gathering, I think that I don't even know about the case. I don't find that very meaningful as a way of understanding AIPAC. The most important thing in understanding AIPAC is that 15 years ago or 17 years ago, when Jim Baker, the Secretary of State, went to AIPAC and said, give up the settlements of the West Bank, give up the idea of Greater Israel, he was booed. And this AIPAC conference, that idea is welcomed. Why is it welcomed? Because Israel has moved to that point of view. The American presidency's, the desire by the American president to condemn those settlements, which actually Barack Obama did in mild terms today, has always been nullified by AIPAC, and that is the problem. Nullification of American policy.
Eli Lake, just a quick question to you. I mean, Barack Obama said in the past that he'd be willing to negotiate with Tehran over the nuclear issue, but that's not something that AIPAC and the Jewish lobby want to see, is it?
Well, you know, I got to tell you that I think that what Barack Obama has now said, he said he would be willing to meet with Kim Jong-il, Hugo Chavez, Fidel Castro face to face. He said that almost a year ago. As his campaign has evolved, what he's saying now is that he would pursue diplomacy in order to stop Iran's building of a nuclear weapon and to stop their support for terrorism. He's criticized the Iraq War on the grounds that it's made Iran stronger, so he's identifying Iran as a threat. And finally, he said that he wouldn't pursue diplomacy, or that he would keep all of his options open. That's actually really not that far from what Bush is saying. So, I mean, I guess, you know, I don't really think that, I think what AIPAC tends to do, and I think there's a big misperception here, no offense, is that AIPAC focuses largely on Congress and almost exclusively in terms of substantive legislation, in terms of congressional sanctions, which are usually symbolic, and of course the foreign aid budget. What AIPAC doesn't do, and there's a whole other realm of foreign policy which involves what presidents say, the kind of secret diplomacy, overt diplomacy, intelligence gathering from the CIA, black operations, and all of these things AIPAC has no say at all.
Okay, that's fine.
And it's not something that AIPAC influences. So I'm saying that when you talk about foreign policy, you think it's just Congress,
for AIPAC,
you know, and I think
as a foreign agent.
Munta Suleiman, let me get a final thought from you, because we're running out of time. Munta Suleiman, let me ask you a final question on the future. Munta Suleiman, let me ask you a final question. Okay, well, let me throw the question to Philip Weiss. Let me throw the question to Philip Weiss, as both of you argue. Philip Weiss, a final question on the future of the Jewish lobby. Are we going to see more alternative voices like J Street emerging to challenge groups like AIPAC?
Well, within the Jewish community, AIPAC understands that it faces something of a crisis. AIPAC is broadening its appeal. One of the very impressive things that AIPAC is doing right now is reaching out to college students, students of color, Christians, and that's very impressive. One of the reasons it's doing so is that it fears that young Jews are beginning to listen to the Arab narrative.
Okay, let me get a final thought from Munther Suleiman, and please be brief because we're running out of time. What do you think the real challenges are ahead for AIPAC, particularly with these ideological changes sweeping the US and the Democrats possibly in power after November?
I think there is a competing forces. America is awakening to the reality that the interest of the United States is different, does not coincide with the interest of the mercenary state, criminal state of Israel, and there should be, America should be true to its ideal of justice and equality throughout the world, a foreign policy that take into consideration the well-being of American and the rest of the world, and try to resolve all the outstanding issues diplomatically and use the soft power and with cooperation with the entire world. I think AIPAC, it's going to diminish its power as we see more blocks, voting blocs in the United States are moving in more prominence, in more organization, and they can influence policy. And AIPAC must, and there's going to be pressure to be registered a foreign agent because it acts and practice as a foreign agent.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Munther Suleiman, Philip Weiss and Eli Lake, thank you all very much indeed for your involvement. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We of course welcome your comments and your suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team here, goodbye for now.